Hello and welcome. I'm Krista Coleman from K12 Insight, and you're joining today's panel to talk about a really great conversation, which is probably already happening in all of your school districts. But we're talking about how to accelerate your district's digital transformation today. The conversation we're having are with two great school leaders that are not only district partners of ours, Zach Lynn from Ithaca City Schools and Ashley Cowger. She's the executive director of strategy and integration at Indianapolis Public Schools. And then our very own Melissa Vasquez, who's our vice president, client success. I am Krista Coleman. I'm the chief customer officer. I am the one, if you are our customers, that I don't sleep if you're not well taken care of. I am also really proud that today the focus of this conversation is going to allow not only our two district leaders to come in and share what they're going through. I feel like what an opportunity for you to also jump in and share and relate through our chat and our QA. Before we kick it off, I'm going to let Zach come off of mute for a minute, just introduce himself, tell a little bit about Ithaca City Schools, and then we'll let the rest of the panelists do the same.
Great. Thanks, Krista. And thanks for having me here today. So I'm Zach Lind. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the Ithaca City School District. I was a teacher for 9 years or so, and then became like an instructional technology coach and then moved into the CIO role here about 5 years ago. So I've been a huge part of this sort of digital transformation effort over the last couple of years at Ithaca. And Ithaca is in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region. It's known for like Cornell University, Ithaca College. So we're like a college town way up in upstate of New York. Google School District, about 5,500 students, and every student gets a device. And we've done a lot over this last couple of years. And I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Thank you, Zach. Ashley, if you come off mute for a minute and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ashley Cowger, and here in Indianapolis Public Schools, we have about 30,000 students, and we're located right in the heart of Indiana. We serve students from all over the area. We're a choice district, so we have what we call a portfolio school district, where we have charter schools within our traditional public schools. And we have schools that we call innovation schools, and there are a variety of different types of innovation schools. But across our entire network of schools in Indianapolis Public Schools, we have one-to-one in place now. Like many of you guys, we were not one-to-one prior to COVID and had the shortest runway possible to become one-to-one to maintain access to instruction for students. And we've had some pressing challenges that I'm sure all of you guys have faced too. And are continuing on with our transformation and the sustainability of one-to-one over time here.
Thank you. Melissa Vasquez.
Hi, I'm Melissa Vasquez. I am the VP of Client Success here at K12 Insight, and I get to work with clients like Zach and Ashley on some really cool projects on how they're just going to meet the needs of all of their constituents, especially in this day and age. Communication is top of mind for everybody. But prior to coming here, similar to Zach, I was a public school educator as well for 11 years, and then made the transition over to ed tech, and have worked in a variety of education technology companies, and really passionate about helping take your goals and make them a reality. So sometimes that's the hardest part. You know exactly where you want to go and what you want to do, but how you get from point A to point B. So that is the piece that my team gets to help support and really make that a reality. So great partners makes all the difference. I'm super excited to be joining the conversation.
Thank you, Melissa. Super excited to have all of you. And I love that you also told your district sizes and shared a little bit about that too, because we all went through this together, no matter how many students we had. And it's such a great perspective, to be able to hear from, districts that are at one-to-one, were one-to-one before, now are still dealing with one-to-one challenges. So love that you shared a little bit about that as well. Just a reminder for the audience, all of the attendees that are watching, feel free to use our chat if you can relate to something and something excites you, or you just kind of shine in and go, me too, and thanks for sharing that. Feel free to use our chat. We will have the QA section open as well too. If you have questions for any of our panelists, don't worry. We're going to save the last 10 minutes. And even if I have a little bit more, we just have some great questions we want to get through. But at the very end, we're going to spend a little time, or you can ask and even come off mute and ask live if you'd like. So if you don't mind, drop them in that Q&A section and we'll promise we'll save some time to get to you. All right, we're ready to jump right in. The first question I'd like to ask is, I'm going to pull Zach and Ashley in on this one, is how have you seen the digital transformation take place in your district? I know we all talk about starting from when, right? You guys have been doing this for a really long time. So Zach, you mentioned, if you could just share like the last 18 months or so, what it's been like for you as far as your transformation is concerned.
Sure. Yeah. So first, it feels like more than 18 months. It feels like sort of like this endless like churn of years. But so for us, what I think a lot about is what happened the last 18 months has a lot to do with what we did in the previous 3 or 4 years. So we put a lot of ed tech tools in place. We went to one-to-one as a district, like way back in 2014, 15 range. We had our Google suite of tools put into place. And so for what happened for us, it was, how is that going to impact teaching and learning in a virtual environment when our students and teachers are scattered around the county, around the country, around the state? And for us, what we saw is the aptitude and ability of our teachers in particular to use and navigate through these digital tools, and the ability for our students to connect all across different areas, it really rose. And so to me, a lot of it is sort of like, it was like, had we been doing our homework beforehand and then seeing how that played out over that 18 months. And so for us, we had a lot of, look, it wasn't easy. There's lots of mishaps, lots of scrambling moments when vendors had late deliveries, all those things that everyone had to sort of go through. But what we did see is, from like an ed tech perspective, our teachers were, they learned how to use these tools because they had to. And so our baseline level of like, how strong is everyone using a digital tool, that rose, significantly. And so now we really were able to talk and have significant conversations about implementation, and digital tool use amongst our students. So for us, it was sort of seeing that arc of putting everything into play and growing from there.
Zach, we might have a question from Juliana. She has her hand raised. I'm going to let her speak.
Juliana might be on mute. Oh, you there? Okay, go ahead. While we see if Juliana's holding, why don't we let Ashley go? And just if you could share, Ashley, with us, same thing, kind of that last 18 months. I love how you kind of talked about the progression. And also, just sharing, there were a lot of teachers before COVID, we still had a little small group that wasn't quite crawling over that technology line of putting everything online. So could you share just a little about what your last 18 months looked like, and then just a little bit about that too?
Sure. I think in a lot of ways we're the opposite of Zach and Ithaca. So in Indianapolis Public Schools, prior to COVID, we had a student learning management system. We use Schoology here. It was very underutilized. There was a handful of teachers in the district that use it regularly, primarily in our secondary grades. What we recognized in this need to actually think about digital transformation and digital strategy in particular is all of the business functions in the district needed to change and think more systematically about what tools are we using for things like timekeeping, what tools are we using for staff's ability to collaborate, teachers and other staff in the district. So we zoomed out in our thinking of digital strategy in Indianapolis Public Schools, where teaching and learning and how teachers were engaging with kids was part of that. But then we also had all of the other business functions of the district that were flipped on their heads. Payroll had to look different. The way we use our timekeeping systems, the way custodians were able to clock in remotely needed to be different than having the machine on the building to clock in and out. So specifically around instruction, we had a massive hill to climb, and that was teaching the basics of how Microsoft Teams works, which is what we use in our district. And at the time, Teams itself was in its infancy. So couldn't do breakout rooms when we started using Microsoft Teams. And we were really dependent upon technology, whether it was technology we owned or technology that was bought from vendors, becoming more sophisticated over time. But our teachers played a huge role in how we built our digital infrastructure in IPS. So we established governance structures where teachers have the right and the responsibility to ask for different fancier tools, and that get vetted from like, how does that tool, how could it work with our infrastructure? How does it not work with our infrastructure? What challenges could we anticipate? What training are people going to need? So this 30,000 foot look at digital strategy has really benefited us in our ability to serve and execute teaching and learning, but I think more importantly, make the in-staff school experience feel seamless. So now our principals, when they are doing their time approvals for their staff and when they're going in and out of classrooms, can do all of that via technology, where before there's a lot of manual labor or like hard copy type things that we had to do in our district. And I think had COVID not happened, we would be 10 years out working on some of the things that we did within like a 5 to 6 month period, which felt like transformation on speed, and it was. But I think the silver lining is we're so much better today and we have room for improvement. But I would say certainly the benefits on the teaching and learning front, but I think the teacher experience feels better too, because they're not having to push paper down to central office.
Yes.
They're not having to, send 800 emails all day, every day. They have ways of transferring information within the district in a more efficient and effective way for them in their like mini lunch breaks that they might get each day. So I would say, on the teaching and learning side, me and Zach, we were so far from where you guys were. And I would say I'm pretty impressed every day to watch how our teachers are thinking about technology as the core to instruction instead of like the nice to have for instruction. And even the operational and business functions of the district are thinking about technology as the core and not this extra thing that might be nice to have.
Oh, that is so good. Because of the fact that prioritizing that nice to have versus now they don't know how to live without it, right? Like they wouldn't know what to do without the systems that you put in place. Speaking of that, just thinking about you as a leader, I can't even imagine when all of this happened. Talk to us a little bit about how it's just changed you. How has it impacted you on a day-to-day basis? I know today you're pretty inspired by what the teams are doing today, but there's a lot of districts and a lot of people on the call today that are still kind of going through some of these growing pains. And for some, it did happen really fast out of force, but they're still trying to iron out what to keep, what worked, what people really love. Do we have too much, too little? So as a leader, how do you look at things like that?
I think for us, one of the things that I think about that's changed is how we communicate within our district. A great example is in sort of the corporate world, you see a lot of tools like Slack or different like workspace chat tools. For us, we've transitioned as a technology department. Our scale is probably a lot smaller than Indianapolis, but like we switched to sort of like chat-based support with both our users, right? So like front offices can like just ping us real quick and get an instant response. But also within our own department, having little sort of chat groups that are working on different projects, keeping tabs on different issues, giving different just key information to each other. But what that's done for us is it's really increased efficiency. I mean, it's something that like when everyone went remote, you couldn't just like walk down the hall and be like, hey, because that person would be 45 miles away or something, right? So now all of a sudden we have this way to communicate, and like we don't have to do giant staff meetings anymore because we're more communicative than we've ever been before. And so that's been sort of a huge, for me, a great way to move forward. Even now, for example, I oversee some of our virtual, I'm like a virtual principal for our virtual elementary. And I'm in constant communication with those teachers, but that's over chat. But we just sort of keep track of stuff during the day. There's no physical location, but we can just keep be more in touch than we've ever been. So that's sort of, I'd say, like, one succinct thing is that ability to communicate. And that does sort of get me to this like little side tangent, which I'll keep short, I promise. But like, I can't stand email. Like, I know you all sent me emails to send this up. Thank you. I'm happy to be here and everything. But that's great. But email, I think, actually will hold us back sometimes because we tend to do 8-paragraph emails with every single, and we could just have a quick conversation or a quick chat group and get something hammered out instead of like a 5-week email chain as we're sort of plodding along. So enough on email, but it does make me rethink, maybe we need to look at email, see if we move people over to chat or something.
Zach, we got one question from Alan Banks. What tools do you use for district-wide chat?
Oh yeah, we just used like Google Chat. You can set up workspaces and we'll set up a front office space with the tech that supports that building, and just go ahead. And what's nice is our users don't have to be trained in it, because the way Google is set up in our district, the chat will pop up in their Gmail, so it just like pops up to the side, and saves a lot of effort.
That's awesome, Zach. Ashley, anything to add? Or you had, like you said, very different dynamics. How would you best describe this year for you and how you looked at all the different changes that needed to take place? How did it impact you as a leader?
Oh man, I'd say the biggest part was getting people invested in a structured way into developing a digital strategy plan. So we actually have a digital strategy strategic plan that outlines all of our actions that have gotten us to here today, and then also for the next 3 years. And it was developed very democratically. So there were teacher committees, principal committees, district leader committees. And I think as a leader in a district that is very autonomized, like because we are a choice district, even departments over time have been able to purchase their own tools or things that they thought would be best for their own team to use. We've had to centralize a lot of that. And by developing this plan in a very democratic way, it brought people into this need to become more structured and streamlined across the entire organization, regardless of school type, regardless of department type. And I don't think that could have happened if it was just us on the digital strategy team saying, we need to have the same tool across all our schools. There's no way that people would have bought into that. No. And I think the benefit too is we've sustained those committees. So I meet with our principal group, our teacher group, our own internal teams at the central office level, meet regularly to figure out how is it going? What do we like? What do we not like? And then what do we want to strategically abandon? Because some of what I have observed over time in the last 18 months, almost 2 years, I can't believe it's been that long, is a lot of new things, new tools, new systems, new processes, and we can't just keep layering on. We have to ask ourselves, what can we strategically abandon so that we can sustain this actual digital strategy core and continue on with the transformation of being better and different all the time. And I would say one thing that I push my leadership team to do regularly is to think of the opportunity that exists. Like we have problems all day, every day. That's every school district in the entire country. And if we just look at things as a problem, we start thinking about the negative. Like, this is hard. This is, too much. COVID is still blah. And totally get all of that. But what is the opportunity available to us? The opportunity a lot of times helps us make the decisions about what we're going to stop doing. We have an opportunity to get better about organizational wide communication. So we're going to stop sending 800 emails like what Zach is referencing. And I think that's the thing that keeps people feeling live and excited about the work that we're doing. instead of thinking about how hard and how difficult and how tired we are. And those things are still true. We're tired, things have been hard, but you have to have the energy and the excitement to bring into it. And it's 100% about how the people are involved in it.
Yeah, and if I can add on to that, Ashley, for my neck of the woods, getting to work with so many districts across the nation, one of the things that I've seen is, I'd almost call it an elevation of the IT leader. So I love how you talked about the development of the digital strategy plan, like from your office. Not that IT hasn't always been a critical component in the education space, but now with all the tools that kind of flew in throughout the pandemic, having somebody sitting in your position and being able to wrap around a strategy. We've worked with more IT leaders in this past 18 months, I would say, than we ever have, because the districts are seeing, if we just pull in this one-off tool, that may not be part of the overall strategy. And how do we encompass that? And so the fact that we're seeing some chats over here on exactly that. How did you get people bought into the digital strategy planning? That piece we've seen just a rise in, like having a seat at the table, making sure that it incorporates everything that is being purchased, used, has a place, and that, what are we going to say no to is a hard conversation. And so I'm going to pull in a couple of those pieces from the chat, Olivia, if you don't mind, because I think they're super relevant. And how do you get people bought in from that standpoint? When you're saying we need to develop this plan, because if you don't, you're going to have everything scattered all over the place. So love where you're going with that.
Yeah, we created a starting place of having a critical analysis done by a third party of our IT and IPS. That generated a report, and I got the report and I looked at it and I said, wow, our baby is ugly. We got a lot of work to do. And that's a really hard pill to swallow. Like, I have 4 big functional teams. IT is one of them. And then I've got business intelligence, digital instruction, and professional learning. And to look at that report and go like, oh, man, we thought we were killing it in certain areas and we're seeing in black and white that we're not. Instead of that becoming something that got buried or something that we didn't talk about, I, in these collaborative groups, brought people together to say, like, this report tells us that our baby is ugly. I need you guys to help us figure out how we're going to make positive change against each of these ugly points in this report over time. And that's really where these committees became incredibly powerful, because it was me and the team being very vulnerable to say, like, we're not killing it in all of the areas. And it's just getting more challenging the more devices we put into the environment. And we need you guys to help us figure out what is thing number 1 versus what is going to be something that we're tackling 2 years from now. And through that, I saw a question in the chat about how do you get people invested when they are resistant to change with technology, was me asking questions like this. What scares you about this technology? And the answers that I get from that question are across the board. I would have, a teacher who's been teaching for 40 years say, well, Ashley, I don't even check my email except once a month. So the fact that you're asking me to do something all day, every day, and I don't feel comfortable with it. And I would say, oh, well, what if we train you up? Like, what if we invest in you to be able to learn how to do those things? And the same teacher who told me that a year and a half ago is one of our model teachers for one-to-one instruction in this district now. And had she not been vulnerable or be given the space to be vulnerable and for us to ask the smart questions about why does this concern you? And some of the things that we heard were, it's just another tool. We've already got 8 other tools. So can we stop using these other things and just use this one? Yeah. Is that going to make you feel better with the technology that we're streamlining? Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, cool. So now we've got more people bought in. I think if you are leading change and hoping for the ongoing transformation, because there's a difference between a point in time transformation and sustainable transformation. And sustainable transformation requires an authentic investment in not being the person with all of the right ideas. And it's giving yourself up to hear from all of the other folks in a structured way, what needs to happen and why, and to have the kind of feedback that our baby is ugly and we have to improve, means that it's not about us, even though technology lives in the digital strategy shop. And that has been, for my own team, even especially the folks who live within the traditional IT world within the team, a very hard and difficult pill to swallow, because it's not how our culture had existed in IPS before. The culture was very much IT says X, so we all do Y. And it just required conversation to bring people along and to understand what they're scared of or why they're worried, and then actually use the feedback to make the decisions for change.
Interesting. Ashley, did you get a lot of the feedback by surveying them, by smaller user groups? You know, some of your, I know you were saying, you know, one of them was your lead teacher in technology. Tell me how you ultimately talk to me about, with all the change that you have, you know, when you're dealing with all these different groups, how do you get that feedback back to you, first of all? And then also, how are you handling those extremely resistant people who are like, too much, too fast? I just want to teach, right? I don't want to learn it. I don't want to learn another technology. I'm already learning here and I'm already learning there. And what's wrong with our old system? And the reason why I'm going to let you keep expanding on this, and I'm going to have Zach add as well, is because one of my questions was actually, how are you dealing with, you know, the all these new challenges at the district? Like, we can't, you know, as a leader, I can imagine just as many praises, you're also dealing with the side that's still a little bit resistant, and how you're dealing with that. So I'd love to hear, one, your feedback, and then how you're dealing with those resistant teachers or staff or students.
I love that question. We started with a general survey across all staff and all students, and a survey that parents could also take. The questions for, you know, each of those three big audiences were the same, but articulated a little bit differently if it was going to a student versus if it was going to a staff member. And we got about 100,000 responses back on that general survey. That is almost too much data to be able to use in making the change forward. So had a good pulse check on what people's worries were, what people were mad about, what people were excited about from that survey. And then honed in on who the key players were to the continuity of business every day and the continuity of instruction every day. And had a principal working group it was democratically chosen, like all principals, who's interested in doing this. I most definitely want representation from all the school types, but this is opt-in. Volunteer your time to help inform what we do next. So principals rallied. Same approach with teachers and the teacher leaders, and then even parents. So I have a few parents who I hear from every single week, and that was a good opportunity for me to say, hey, you have some really good ideas. Do you want to spend 2 hours with me next month? Here's what we're going to do. And I think it was just genuine excitement to hear from other people and to do it in a structured way. So like, I built my PowerPoint deck and facilitation guide and asked similar questions of the user groups, but then things that were role specific for a teacher, like what kind of document display would you like to have available to you? What do you want to be able to do around your classroom versus what you do remotely outside of the building? And then for principals, like, how do we give you the 30,000-foot view of all the things that are happening in your building? And that was the committee groups was a way of getting deeper into what are people asking for? Why are they actually asking for it? How does it apply within our work every day? And then when could we reasonably implement a change like that? And so you had to do, I like think about this, I use this visual with my team all the time. Like, you both had to do a global survey and you had to build these committee groups from the ground up. And then you then have a way of capturing everybody. The approach is just different because capacity is obviously limited to be able to host, you know, a ton of one-off committees. And then with the team that I have, they were also facilitating some of these offshoot groups. So we just used the power of our own time and took a good 8 weeks to just do that kind of surveying.
Oh, that's great. Zach, what about you? I know Some of the, as far as the families and the students and the one-to-one were figured out, but there were a lot of other layers of technology you had to evaluate, possibly bring in and add, or even displace in some cases. How did you manage, through all of that? And what about the ones that were really resistant? How did you work with your staff on that?
Yeah, all great questions. I want to say, I think it is really important to have that top down, but also that bottom up approach. We definitely had breakout groups with our teachers, and they came up with grade level specific plans for implementation during virtual learning. And that created sort of a backbone of how we're going to sort of approach a lot of our work. For us, the biggest obstacles were just we have a large geographic footprint. So trying to figure out we have both rural and urban settings in our school district. So figuring out connecting families to the internet, figuring out the logistics was one side of what we had to do. But then, the other side was working with our staff. What we did is we sort of tiered our work into 3 levels with teachers. So we looked at if you're a beginner, here's just the basics, and here's where we want you to start. We have our high-end users would be tier 3, and then sort of in the middle. And what that allowed us to do, and this is sort of good professional development, and it's what we try to do as much as we can everywhere, but is give people entry points. So when you have anyone that's perhaps resistant or not wanting to change, you give them an entry point that's both accessible, interesting, and engaging to them, and sort of hope that they can grow from there. One other big challenge, I think, we, during these last 18 months, it's easy to have this conversation and just talk about the tech, right? But we had a world that was boiling there also at the same time. So for us, we also had to really do some deep thinking about what's going on in the hearts and souls of our students, of our teachers, of our staff. And how do we bridge cultural divides and gaps? So it's easy to say tech, that's not really the domain of technology, but what we know is that as technology has changed, we do have to think about that. So we had conversations with staff about what does it mean to have a camera on in certain students' homes, and how might the families react. We had conversations with how do we translate across language barriers? How do we show learning across language barriers to families that are home? How do we show families that come from different educational backgrounds that what we're doing is sound pedagogically? So for us, it was a fascinating sort of look into sort of the intersection between sort of that home world and that school world. And I think we'll learn for years to come we'll continue to learn from what happened there. But I do just want to say overall, I think it's important to talk about, we had large social movements going on at the same time. And it's not that the tech wasn't important, but we just had to think sort of how does the tech fit into that and allow our communities to have platforms to discuss those things in responsible ways, and sort of what role can we play there? So those were the things that we were grappling with and thinking about during that.
Zach, I love that you brought in the human element, because as we were going through, I was thinking, this doesn't sound very different from a development cycle, right? There's the requirements gathering or the feedback process. There's looking at the data and seeing what's actionable, the making of a timeline to have something that's realistic and relevant to the problems that were being addressed. It's all very much like a product lens. And so when you throw in the human aspect of it, I think that's the piece that was the big challenge, right? It's the big elephant in the room. We can go through all the steps and stages, but if we weren't addressing that, and our communities were turning to districts as a place that they were looking to for answers, for safety, for resources. And the fact that you took that position that, we have to do all those things, but then we have to tie in what's happening in our world and looking at it from a human lens. I don't know if that's an approach that everybody took, because it's not so tangible, right? So how did you digest all of those pieces? Because I think that that matters. Approach matters, and you know, how people feel that they were treated through all of this process change. So how did you handle that piece specifically?
So first of all, I'll say, like, I'm sure we messed up a lot of things, right? Like, because when you do this type of work, it's messy, right? Like, it's like, so I don't say that as a slight to anyone in our organization. Like, we're trying our best. So how do we do that? So I think it's one, like, listening to what families are saying. This sounds simple, but it's like trying to minimize the bureaucracy involved. Like, if we're providing internet to a family, like, we're not going to require them to fill out a financial disclosure form based on how much money. Like, we're just going to say, all right, like, no questions asked. Same thing with devices. Oh, you lost your third device this year. Like, right now, this is not a time that we need to like give you a hard time about that. So for us, when we think about disrupting sort of the systemic injustices in our school systems, for me, it's being non-punitive towards our students, right? And our families, right? We're here to educate them. We're not here to like have some moral high ground about computer usage, right? So it's trying to be as open-minded as possible to all the outcomes that could happen. So when we talk with our tech staff, for example, it's conversations like, look, our families right now are suffering, they're struggling. We need to just sort of like meet them where they are at. Even if they live 3 blocks away and they need a delivery, so be it. We're not here to give them a hard time about those things, and it just try to get their students engaged back into our educational processes. But for me, you know, and it sounds simple, but I want to disrupt the things that would cause obstacles in the past. So that's the systemic approach that I tried to do. Now, again, I always need to say, like, that's what we try to do. It's never perfect, but we have to come into it with our sort of heart and mind, looking at it that way, and then see how far we can get.
That's so good. And actually, this kind of leads us into the next question, Melissa. This one's for you. We just heard from Ashley and Zach, like, all the challenges of all the different technologies they had to kind of look at, make it make sense. And like Ashley said, we can't just keep layering it on top. These now have to somehow come together. And it has to make sense, right? So it doesn't feel like too much, but we need to make sure we have the ones that really do make us efficient. How'd that affect you and other customers? Is, you know, Let's Talk took off like crazy because of the fact that people needed to communicate more than ever. And we needed to systemize the approach of the communication so we knew everybody was heard and got messages back to them. How did all of this change for you? And how did you prepare for the world that your new district partners had to deal with bringing in a new technology?
Yeah, and actually, Zach just kind of took some of the words right out of my mouth of really trying to meet the communities where they're at. Is the approach that we have been working with as we've been doing our own fact finding and inquiry and discovery, as we are working with districts that are saying, hey, we need Let's Talk because we need these communication tools, and whatever channels their communities are already in and where they prefer to be is what we're helping them expand to. For example, text message. Data and research is showing that more families than ever want to be engaged via text. It's not something that I think was as common. So to Zach's point, like disrupting those obstacles, really helping showcase how these technologies that the families prefer and the communities prefer can be light and easy and don't have to be arduous as a lift is what we've really been looking at on our end. Gone are the days of you sitting in a 1-day full training to get up and running on some type of technology. It's analyze what it is and how can we make it the lightest as possible so that you can have that up and running quickly to solve a problem, and then have ongoing solutions for that as well. So some of the things that we have put into place are, of course, the remote learning option, more videos, short videos, regular, reliable, like on-demand training that you can send staff to, because it's not only new tools that you're bringing into the district, but we're also seeing this year a lot of turnover in staff or changing of positions. So keeping people fresh on what the tools are that they're going to have in their new position, or coming in mid-year and mid-cycle to something that's already up and running. Our technology teams or different departments don't have the time to stop and train every time they get a new staff member. So really looking at putting in place like how we can do that so that it's just an ongoing component of your onboarding, and that they can just pick up and lift. And part of that is, like I said, the traditional web trainings, the videos, but it's also working with our product team through the voice of the customer on how to make the product itself just intuitive. And they've been super responsive to changes that we can make, the things that don't make sense. So what is it that would gravitate somebody to click here versus over here? They've been phenomenal with that. And so I think it's bringing that voice of the customer back to our product team in tandem with these easier to deploy methods to make sure that people are able to use the tools and that they feel that what was brought in was actually useful. Because if you are doing this great job to go in and make your strategic digital plan, you bring in these tools that people don't feel like are accessible, then we've caused the roadblock. So really making sure that we're making them as accessible as possible is what we've been doing on our end. And then since we're a customer service is like our background, it's the team has just been empowered to, take it to the next level of whatever that customer service needs to look like to make that district successful. Because we know we're not the only tool. Like
That's
you
right.
just mentioned,
That's right.
You're weaving so many of these tools in. So that's the other.
I think that's vendors' biggest mistake, Melissa, that they think that we're the only, when they're doing their implementations. And I think if all the IT leaders are on this call, you should command that this level of meeting where, your customers where you are. We do have to adapt as vendors to what your needs are, especially when there is so much training in so many different areas that we didn't expect this year. It's okay to challenge your vendors and have those really tough implementation talks before you buy and understand what that pathway is going to be, so that it does feel digestible and achievable for, the community that you're serving. Ashley, I want to go back to you on one thing. Zach kind of got into a little bit on accessibility, right? And you didn't get a chance to chime in on that. And I do want to hear, because I know we do have several people who are on this call of how you are using Let's Talk. I do want to circle back around to that, but I'd like for you to chime in just really quickly on the accessibility side, because I think you both have very different demographics geographically where you are. And he shared a little bit about, we have very rural, urban, we have, the fact that people's financial information should have nothing to do with the type of internet they have access to. What were some of the challenges that you had? And from an accessibility standpoint, how did your team respond?
We had to start with creating structure because the accessibility, especially with our learning materials, was disadvantaged for our kids whose primary language was not English. So we have some schools in Indianapolis public schools that have 15, 20 different languages spoken all within one building. And not having learning material that is available in different languages was really problematic when we were all at home doing virtual work and virtual school. So we call it our Indianapolis Public Schools tech specs. Any department or learning material or any application schools are requesting, the very first step is that the vendor has to complete our tech specs. And the biggest section in those specs is around accessibility. How does that software support people who have visual impairment? What about our people who have deaf and hard of hearing challenges? What about our people who have, English not as their first language? And it helped us not waste our time on different platforms or different tools that weren't going to be available to anybody who might have a special need or a language need, or create barriers for teachers to be able to provide the level of instruction that they wanted to provide for students. So that tech spec document has saved us so much time and energy just to see up front, like, what exactly is available via the technology for supporting people who maybe are not like typical or, whatever the case is. And it was sort of cage rattling to our vendors to expect that document to be completed. It's a pretty simple document, but you have to check the boxes of like what's available, what's not. And then it allows us to have really meaningful conversations with the internal people who are requesting whatever the software tool is. And then also to say to the vendor, hey, we really love what you have. It's not ready for us. And here's what needs to be available before we're willing to move forward. And that's helped us in our strategic abandonment, or like potentially not getting ourselves into a situation where we're taking something on that really is not going to meet our needs down the line. And so that structure, while seeming so simple, has allowed positive benefit in a lot of different areas. Financially, it's saved us from buying things that just weren't going to eventually meet our needs. And then it's allowed us to use those resources on things that we know will. So one of our investments was Let's Talk. Like the whole team listened to this. We made a huge list, including our tech specs. Can we make it do all of this? Because this saves us like 7 other platforms if we can do these things. And we're going, yes, 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 yes. Cool. We're putting a lot of time and energy behind that now. Which is going to pay off because we know up front that our needs will be met. Yeah. But I think it was a way of thinking that hadn't existed previously. And we're even seeing it play out. We're in a textbook adoption cycle for science and social studies, all grades, science and math, all grades. And we've had to rule out some curriculum vendors who only provide their curriculum in English. That's not going to help our students. And we wouldn't have probably asked that kind of question until we were further down the road with our teachers vetting of these curricula to get to the point of deciding, oh, wait, we just spent all this time and it doesn't even offer anything for people who, don't speak English. Come on. So we've had
I love that.
Paid off greatly for us.
And the practical aspect of something like creating the tech specs ahead of time, I think those are the kinds of things for the participants that I'm seeing on, is really resonating. And, back to the access piece with, I'm seeing 100 different languages spoken, over here in this district. And the other trend that we're seeing in the data is that families, are really interested in self-service as well. Oftentimes for some of these facts that there's language barriers and things of that nature. And so if they can come in and actually access what they're looking for on their own, because we're in this place where everybody's more tech savvy, they are, we're seeing the numbers go up and up and up on that as well. So I'm glad we passed your tech specs and we have some of those things like the translations and the chatbots and the knowledge bases that really help to take your digital plan and move it to the next level.
We only have about 2 minutes left, and I wanted Zach to chime in because Zach, you've been a customer prior to pandemic. Talk to us a little bit how having Let's Talk in place when all this happened helped.
Yeah, so this was really important. And I think, to be clear, Let's Talk is part of what made us be able to do this. And I'm not just saying that. When we when we went into sort of virtual learning, all of our board meetings, for example, were virtual, right? There was no way for us to really know on a day-to-day basis, like what's going on. And so for us, we have internal commitments that when we get sort of Let's Talk messages from our community, we have a 24-hour turnaround time where we try to give a response. I mean, I guess there's some anonymous ones that are hard to respond to, but what it allowed us to do is really know what's happening in our community. And we weren't going on educated guesses or some sort of article based on societal trends, but rather like, hey, what's happening in this school? How are the folks feeling? And then it's also embracing negative feedback loops and taking the strands in them that are constructive and trying to be better, right? Like there's a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, and some of that there's nothing we could do about, but there were things we could do about, and that came through that portal for us. So it was really a solid feedback loop, and it allowed people that maybe wouldn't want to come to a board meeting and say something in public to just send a quiet message about a concern or a thought. So again, you can elevate voices from those that maybe you wouldn't hear from in other settings. So for us, it's just a good way to keep a pulse on our community. And we did, just that was our portal, particularly when everyone was in their homes. It's how we knew what was going on.
Yeah, I love that. And we heard so many great stories about districts, creating ways where you could text if you needed a printed homework packet, and you could, you could message that a teacher went above and beyond, and districts were able to give awards through communication that just happened through, like you say, these subtle messages that were coming in through dialogues, through Let's Talk, that let the community still feel like a community, even though we were all in our own household. So good to hear. If there are questions in the QA, our time is up, and I want to be respectful of the fact that all of you need to get back to what we could, honestly, I could sit here and interview both of you all day, and Melissa and I would have a blast continuing to just hear how you're managing through this. It's so encouraging. But how I know there's a couple of follow-up questions. If you just send them to my email, I promise I could get them to Ashley and Zach and get you an answer, just because it was so great, all the things they were sharing today. And I'm sorry we didn't get to do it live, but I promise if there's a question in your chat, we will get it back to you. If there is a question you wanted to ask live, if you don't mind adding it to the chat and specifically asking if it's Ashley, Zach, or Melissa that you want to answer, then I'll make sure that I get the questions to them and get the answers back to you. So stay in with me a little bit longer if you have further questions, and add it to the chat. For everybody else, will the recording be available? That's a great question.
Yes, we will be sending it out after the webinar is over. So anyone who registered, they will get a link.
Oh, perfect. So you will get a link. You can stay in and add anything to the chat, and we will make sure that all of your questions get answered. To Ashley, to Zach, to Melissa, and Olivia, thanks for setting all of this up. I think these conversations are so healthy and so good. We need to keep having them. But for all of you today who spent the hour with us, or the 50 minutes that we just went over, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.